For years, I believed I had struck gold in love. My marriage wasn't just steady, it was warm, dependable, filled with quiet laughter and unshakable trust. When I looked at my husband, I didn't just see a partner, I saw my safe place in the storm. To anyone watching from the outside, it probably looked like I had everything a woman could dream of. Stability, devotion, a home built on love. And in many ways, I did. But even while my marriage felt strong, another bond in my life was crumbling right in front of me. My sister, once my partner in crime during childhood games and late-night whispers, had become my harshest critic. Every family gathering turned into a battlefield. Snide remarks about my looks, little lies whispered behind my back, and insults dropped at just the right moment chipped away at me more than I liked to admit. It wasn't playful sibling rivalry. It was mean, cutting, and personal. And it left me questioning what I had ever done to deserve such venom from someone who was supposed to love me. The strangest part was, I never had an answer. I'd replay old memories like a scratched record, birthdays when we were kids, high school secrets, the years we spent side by side in college, searching for the moment everything shifted. But I could never pinpoint it. All I had were wounds dressed up as jokes and an ache that lingered long after each family visit. My husband would hold me and tell me to brush it off, but deep down, I felt the sting of something I couldn't name. There were days I tried to convince myself she was just insecure, that maybe her words were more about her own pain than about me. But it was hard to believe that when she stared me down with that cold smirk, as if every part of my happiness was an insult she couldn't forgive. She would jab at me about gaining a little weight, sneer at my clothes, even spread rumors that made me sound foolish or weak. It was like she needed me to shrink so she could feel taller. And no matter how much I ignored it, her voice lingered long after she left the room. Sometimes I'd drive home from family dinners in silence, staring out the car window, replaying her words until they blurred with the streetlights. My husband's hand would rest gently on mine, his voice soft, telling me not to let her get to me. And for a moment, I'd try to believe him. But then, in the quiet of my own thoughts, I'd feel the hurt sink deeper, settling into a place I couldn't easily reach. Her cruelty wasn't just mean-spirited, it was deliberate, like she wanted to carve herself into every part of my life. I often wondered how things had gotten so twisted between us. Growing up, she was my best friend. We shared secrets no one else knew, covered for each other when life got messy, and promised we'd always stay close. Somewhere along the way, that promise shattered. And the more I searched for the reason, the more it slipped through my fingers. All I knew was that every time she opened her mouth, it felt less like family and more like betrayal. What hurt the most was the silence it created between the rest of my family and me. They saw her jabs, her smirks, her endless digs, yet no one ever truly stepped in. Maybe they thought it was harmless sisterly rivalry. Maybe they were too used to it. But for me, each insult was like a tiny cut, and over the years, those cuts began to feel like scars. I carried them quietly, pretending I was fine, while inside I questioned why the people closest to me didn't see how deep it went. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I forced smiles, swallowed comebacks, and convinced myself that rising above her cruelty was the only way to survive it. But the truth was, every encounter left me a little more fragile. Every dinner, every holiday, every birthday, they weren't just family moments anymore. They were battlegrounds I had to prepare for, armor I had to wear, knowing my own sister would aim for the cracks. And no matter how much I wanted to believe she'd grow out of it, she only seemed to get sharper with time. Looking back now, I realized the pain was building towards something I couldn't yet see. I didn't know it then, but the answers I had been searching for were already waiting for me, hidden in a place I never would have thought to look. And when I finally stumbled upon them, everything about her hatred, and my silence, would make a devastating kind of sense. One quiet afternoon, I found myself back at my parents' house, wandering through the rooms that held pieces of my childhood. Dust floated lazily in the light that streamed through the curtains, and the air carried that familiar mix of old wood and faint lavender from my mother's cleaning sprays. I told myself I'd help them tidy up, clear out some of the clutter that had been sitting untouched for years. But if I'm honest, part of me just wanted to lose myself in the past, in memories untouched by the bitterness of the present. When I stepped into my sister's old bedroom, it felt like walking into a time capsule. The walls still bore faint outlines where posters once hung, and the faded carpet carried echoes of teenage secrets and late-night laughter we used to share. In the corner, stacked neatly, was a box I hadn't seen before. It was worn and taped at the edges, the kind of box that held things too sentimental to throw away, but too painful to keep close. Something in me hesitated, but my hands were already reaching for it. I carried it to the bed and sat down, brushing dust from the lid. Lifting it open, I found an assortment of keepsakes. Old bracelets, crumpled notes, and photographs that smelled faintly of time itself. I smiled at first, sifting through pieces of her world, pieces I half remembered. And then, as I flipped through the stack of Polaroids, my breath caught. One picture stopped me cold. My husband and my sister, side by side, their closeness radiating off the glossy paper in a way that froze my heart. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I held the photo closer, studying every detail. The way his hand brushed against her arm, the way she leaned in, smiling like she owned the moment. It wasn't just a casual snapshot. There was an intimacy there, something unspoken that screamed louder than words ever could. My heart pounded in my chest, and suddenly the room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. Then I turned the photo over. On the back, scrawled in ink, was a date. My stomach dropped. It matched perfectly with the time he and I had taken a short break in our relationship, years ago. A break I thought had been nothing more than a pause in our love story. But here it was, staring back at me in black and white, a hidden chapter I had never been told. My hands trembled, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The truth had been sitting in this box all along, waiting for me to uncover it. Shock gave way to something sharper, realization. Suddenly, all those years of her bitterness, the cutting remarks, the endless hostility, they clicked together like puzzle pieces finally locking into place. She hadn't just hated me without reason. She had been carrying jealousy, resentment, and shame, all wrapped in the memory of a moment she never wanted me to discover. And now, I was holding the proof in my hands. I sat there on the edge of the bed, the photograph burning in my hand like a secret too heavy to carry. My mind spun, dragging me through every memory where she had rolled her eyes at my happiness, every insult she had thrown like a dagger, every time she tried to make me feel small. It all made sense now. Her cruelty wasn't random. It was a shield, a weapon she wielded to cover up what she had done. She had been trying to bury her guilt by burying me. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Anger, hurt, betrayal, but also clarity. For years, I had twisted myself into knots trying to figure out why she despised me so deeply. Now, I finally understood. And somehow, the truth didn't just hurt. It set something inside me free. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining her venom. She had been carrying this secret like poison, and I had just stumbled upon the antidote. I tucked the photo back into the box, my hands steady now. My heart still raced, but it wasn't with fear anymore. It was with resolve. I knew I couldn't stay silent, not this time. The picture had explained everything, but it had also handed me something I hadn't had before: power. And as I stood up and looked around that room filled with shadows of the past, I knew exactly who I needed to face next. I asked her to meet me at a small cafe, the kind of place where the clatter of cups and low hum of conversation might soften the edges of what I was about to do. My heart beat fast as I slid into the booth, the photograph tucked carefully in my purse. When she walked in, she wore that same look she always did around me, a mix of superiority and disdain, as if just sitting across from me was an inconvenience she'd rather avoid. But today, I wasn't the same sister she thought she could cut down. We exchanged pleasantries that felt paper-thin, words stretched tight with tension. My palms were damp, but my voice stayed calm as I reached into my bag and laid the photograph on the table between us. She froze. For a flicker of a moment, I saw something break in her eyes: recognition, fear, maybe even shame. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She leaned back, arms crossed, and smirked, as if daring me to speak the truth aloud. Is this why you've hated me all these years? I asked, my voice low but steady. The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. She tried to laugh it off at first, shaking her head, muttering denials. But her hands betrayed her. They trembled slightly as she pushed the photo away, as if the paper itself burned to the touch. And I knew, without her saying a single word, that I had hit the nerve I was searching for. Her denial didn't last long. The smirk on her face twisted into something darker as she leaned across the table, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You were never good enough for him," she hissed, her eyes flashing. "He should have been mine. Everyone knew it." The venom in her words sent a chill down my spine, but it also lit a fire in me I hadn't felt before. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking under her insults. I was watching her unravel. She tried to cloak her bitterness and arrogance, insisting that I had somehow stolen what she believed belonged to her. But beneath the bravado, I saw the cracks. Her voice wavered, her bravado faltered, and every word she threw at me only confirmed what I had already pieced together. The years of her cruelty hadn't been about me at all. They were about her, about the secret she carried, the shame she couldn't shake, the jealousy that ate at her every time she saw me happy. I stayed quiet, letting her words echo between us. I didn't need to shout back, didn't need to match her fury with my own. Because sitting there, watching her spit out years of pent-up resentment, I realized something powerful. I finally held the truth, and she knew it. And that truth made me stronger than her spite could ever make her. The more she spoke, the calmer I became. It was almost surreal. For years, I had let her words pierce me, cut me open, leave me questioning myself. But now, every insult she hurled only made her look smaller, weaker. I watched her grasp at power that no longer existed, her face flushed with anger, her hands restless on the table. And I knew, with a certainty I had never felt before, that the balance between us had shifted forever. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm, and said, "You don't get to hurt me anymore." She blinked, stunned by my steadiness, as if the armor she had always cracked had suddenly become unbreakable. I didn't need to argue with her, didn't need to prove myself or relive every wound she had inflicted. The photograph had already done that for me. It had lifted the veil, and nothing she said could ever make me doubt my worth again. She sat there seething, her bitterness spilling into the silence, but I didn't flinch. I simply stood, tucking the photo back into my bag, and let her sit with the truth she could no longer bury. Walking out of that cafe, I felt lighter, but also sharper. I wasn't finished, not yet, because exposing her to me was one thing. Exposing her to everyone else, that would be the moment she finally lost the power she had clung to for so long. I didn't storm out of that cafe with rage in my veins. No, what I carried instead was clarity. Shouting at her, throwing the past in her face, that would have been too easy, too forgettable. I wanted something she couldn't laugh off, something that would slice through her arrogance in a way my silence never could. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about anger. It was about precision, about letting the truth speak louder than any insult she could ever conjure. So I began to plan. My family was gathering soon, one of those dinners where everyone packed into the living room, balancing plates on their laps, trading stories as if we were still children around the same kitchen table. I knew her routine by heart, the little digs she loved to sprinkle into conversation, the smirk she wore when she thought no one else noticed how cruel she was being. And I knew this time, I wouldn't sit quietly and let her carve me down in front of everyone. The photograph was still in my bag, folded neatly inside an envelope. Just knowing it was there gave me a strange sense of calm, like carrying a secret weapon. She thought she had spent years controlling the narrative, making me look weak, foolish, less than. But soon, I'd turn the spotlight directly on her. And when the truth finally surfaced in front of all the people she had tried to manipulate, she wouldn't just lose her power. She would lose her mask. The night of the gathering, I felt an odd steadiness settle over me. My heart wasn't racing, my palms weren't clammy. Instead, there was this quiet resolve, like I had finally stepped into a role I was meant to play all along. The house buzzed with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the warmth of conversations layered over each other. I watched her move through the crowd, smiling that sweet practice smile she saved for everyone else, the one that hid the venom she reserved for me. And, as expected, it didn't take her long. Between bites of food and sips of wine, she started in. Small comments at first, sharp enough for me to feel, subtle enough that others might miss. Then, as always, she grew bolder. A jab about my dress, a remark about how I always needed saving. The room chuckled politely, not fully catching on to the cruelty beneath her words. But I heard it, I felt it, and I knew exactly what to do next. I reached for my bag, my fingers brushing against the envelope. My pulse quickened, but not from fear, from anticipation. This was the moment I had been waiting for. She thought she was in control, weaving her story, painting me as small. But she had no idea that the truth she had buried for years was about to come alive, right there at the family table. I waited until she was mid-sentence, her voice dripping with false charm, when I calmly slid the envelope onto the center of the table. The chatter around us faltered, forks clinked against plates, and all eyes turned toward me. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out the photograph and laid it flat for everyone to see. The silence that followed was heavy, almost electric, as if the room itself was holding its breath. "This," I said softly, my gaze fixed on her, "is the reason behind years of cruelty. Not because I ever wronged her, but because of jealousy and secrets she hoped I'd never uncover." My words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. The picture spoke louder than I ever could. My family leaned in, their faces shifting from confusion to shock as the reality settled in. Her mask slipped in real time, her practiced composure cracking under the weight of the truth. She tried to scoff, to brush it off with another one of her cutting remarks, but no one was laughing this time. The room stayed frozen, every eye locked on her. For once, she wasn't the one controlling the narrative. I was. And in that stillness, in that undeniable truth staring back from a simple photograph, she realized what I had always known deep down. Her power over me was gone. She shot up from her chair, her face red, her words tumbling out in a flurry of denial and fury. But no one rushed to defend her this time. My parents sat frozen, my relatives wide-eyed, their silence louder than any scolding could have been. And in that silence, she seemed smaller than I had ever seen her, stripped of the power she had carried for so long. Humiliation clung to her like a second skin as she grabbed her purse and stormed out, the door slamming behind her with a finality that rattled through the room. For a moment, the air was thick with discomfort. My parents exchanged guilty glances, their voices low when they finally spoke. "We should have seen it," my mother whispered, her eyes searching mine, full of regret. My father reached for my hand, squeezing it gently, as if trying to make up for years of blind neglect with that one gesture. Their apologies poured out, not rehearsed, not polished, just raw, heavy with the weight of things they couldn't undo. And then, I felt my husband's arm slip around my shoulders. His expression was tight, uneasy, but his voice was steady when he leaned in and said, "I'm here. My life is with you. Always." There was no denying the discomfort in his eyes, but there was also a truth I needed to hear, that despite the past, despite the photograph, his loyalty belonged to me now. And in that moment, I let myself believe him. The room slowly began to breathe again, voices rising in cautious conversation as plates were pushed aside and the weight of what had just happened lingered like smoke. I sat there quietly, taking it all in. For years, I had been the target of her bitterness, the butt of her jokes, the punching bag for her hidden shame. And now, for the first time, she wasn't there to control the story. She had walked away, and in her absence, the silence spoke volumes. My relatives avoided her defense, their eyes heavy with the realization of how blind they had been. Some looked at me with pity, others with a kind of respect I wasn't used to seeing. But it didn't matter what they thought anymore, because the truth was finally out. And once truth is out, it can't be buried again. That was the one thing she could never take back. I leaned back in my chair, letting my shoulders drop, releasing a tension I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. It felt like unclenching a fist I had been holding for years. The weight was gone. She could no longer twist my life into her game of bitterness and envy. For the first time, I felt free from her venom, and that freedom was louder, stronger, and more lasting than any revenge I could have dreamed of. As the evening wound down, I gathered my things, slipping my bag over my shoulder with the photograph still tucked safely inside. I didn't need to wave it around anymore. It had already done its work. Walking toward the door, I felt every pair of eyes on me, but this time I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. My parents' apologies, my husband's embrace, the stunned silence of my family, all of it stitched together into something I hadn't expected to find tonight. Peace. When I stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around me like a long-awaited embrace. The sky was clear, the stars scattered wide, and for the first time in years, I lifted my head high without the shadow of her judgment pressing down on me. She was gone, her mask shattered, her grip over my life broken. And I was still here, stronger for having endured it all, stronger for having chosen truth over silence. As I walked away from that house, I realized revenge hadn't been about anger at all. It hadn't been about striking back or stooping to her level. It was about exposure, about letting the truth shine so brightly that her lies could no longer survive in its light. And in that final moment, with my head held high, I knew I had won. Not by destroying her, but by freeing myself.